Well, thank you for inviting me once again. In Zen, we talk about habit energy as a problem, but this habit energy of yours I quite like, so please keep it. I wouldn't get off my duff to come visit you otherwise, and I do love to come and visit you. To see old friends and everyone looking like they're a new face behind their mask. I'd also like to thank Evie for trading Sundays with me after she'd already had her talk prepared once for this month. I had to switch to last month because we have a paucity of volunteers in the prison program. So Sundays I'm often in Deer Lodge, and I have to say that they don't let them, well, they do let them wear masks, but nobody wears masks there for whatever reason. So it's nice to see COVID careful people, even if I can't recognize who you are sometimes. Strength, I understand, is your current theme. And I'm also remembering that I have been asked by members of your congregation not to read Bible verses and talk about Jesus and Christianity, but rather to talk about Zen and Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. And I won't do either one of those things, but I will have a hymn later. We think of strength in terms of something like tensile strength. How much can something be stretched before it snaps, like a fishing line? How big a fish can it handle? Or we think about strength as in a country road and we see the how many ton limit is on the bridge. How strong is the bridge? How much can it bear? And those may seem very physical world examples, but how far can we be stretched before we snap? How much load can we bear before we collapse? And that has a lot to do with what people call our psychospiritual strength. So we all have different strengths in different areas, what we can bear, how much we can take before we snap. And as Jermaine and I were talking before the service, COVID times seem to be stretching us and loading us and making us a little snappier than we might otherwise be. We also think about strength as how much we can lift or carry or push or pull. And we have built into us mechanisms that kick into play before the bridge collapses, before the line snaps. Defense mechanisms, which I've talked about before. The trick, of course, is to develop enough spiritual strength that God or Spirit or whatever you want to say can help us with the heavy lifting. And we don't have to trigger those other mechanisms. That's the ideal. Now, as far as what I'm going to talk about today, I've been here a lot of times. And one of my faculty mentors and my boss at the Counseling Center at Kansas State, a guy named John Steffen, used to say, every teacher has one class in them that they teach under various titles with different arrangements. So hopefully there's just enough new material here and the arrangement is different enough that you don't have to fight to stay awake. Likely you're all aware that Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh died on January 21st. He had for many years been struggling with after effects of a stroke. And the thing, if you know Thich Nhat Hanh, and a lot of you do through his readings or through things I've shared with you, he's always teaching. It's a Zen master thing. I'm a Dharmacharya, I'm not a Zen master. Don't ever confuse those two things. And some people have said, all these years, something like 8 years, that he's had to be cared for. With his psycho-spiritual strength, why didn't he just allow himself to die instead of making so much work for so many people caring for him? So if you know Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, and you know that he's always teaching, that's not your question. Your question is, what is he teaching us? And my answer to that is, with his physical strength, he's willing to put up with all this stuff post-stroke victim because he's teaching us how to bear adversity. He's teaching us how to care for the sick, the elderly, and the infirm. He's still teaching us. That's my understanding of Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. And we say Thai, so I'll probably lapse into Thai when I speak about him for the most part. So I think that that is a kind of strength that he had. He's bearing the adversity not because he's afraid to die, he totally isn't. He understands that he is life. He's not his organism. There's a cute story about, he said that he didn't want somebody to put his ashes in an urn and put them in a stupa and for people to think he was there. And the person he was talking to said, "Oh, too late, we've already built the stupa." He said, "Okay, put a sign on the stupa. The sign will say, 'I'm not in here, Thich Nhat Hanh.'" And he said, "Oh, while you're at it, put a sign beside it that says, 'I'm not out here either.'" So one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to solve the mystery of where's Thich Nhat Hanh. But that's still to come. Previews of coming attractions. Well, let's just solve the mystery now. Now, Christians solved the mystery long since. So we'll borrow a very old hymn. And you'll be glad to know with my singing skills, I'm not going to sing it, I'm going to read it. Just sing enough that you get a sense of the rhythm and I don't ruin your ears. I serve a risen Savior, he's in the world today. I know that he is living, whatever people say. Okay, now I will read. I see his hand of mercy. I hear his voice of cheer. And just the time I need him, he's always near. He lives. He lives. Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me. He talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives. He lives. Salvation to impart. You ask me how I know he lives. He lives within my heart. He lives within my heart. These great beings live within our heart. Whether they died 2,000 years ago or 10 days ago, these great beings that teach us the profound truths about our life and our world, they build themselves into our hearts. So you never have to look far for God or Jesus or Thich Nhat Hanh. You find God, you find Jesus, you find Thich Nhat Hanh in your own heart. So you don't have to look outside. You can just come and look inside, and you can hear. There are two more verses to this hymn that I won't go into, but it's a really great old hymn. And you go into your heart, and your practice that you have been learning here and probably for your whole life is built in. And when you need it, or when you look for it, it's there. It's just there. All the people you've been worshiping with for all these years, they're also built in. They're just there. You carry your congregation with you in your heart also. They asked Thich Nhat Hanh when he was doing a speaking tour in the United States to help stop the Vietnam War. They said, "Isn't it hard for you to be here just all alone?" And he looked at this person, because the question shocked him. I wasn't there. This was reported to me. The person shocked him. And when he just didn't know what to make, and he said, "I'm not alone. I carry an entire Sangha inside myself." Psychologists know that this isn't just religious doctrine. This is actually the case. We actually develop internal representations of all the people we know well. Sometimes even people we don't know that well. And this can be an asset, or this can be a problem. So you have access to Jesus, you have access to God, you have access to your congregation. Anytime you're quiet and you go inside. All these people not only live out here in the world, not only have they lived in the world, they live in you. So all the strength that you have personally is augmented by all the strength of all those that live in you. You're way stronger than you think if you just access. It's there. I think I told you before, when I got plopped in the hospital for 10 days with COVID, I was very aware of that. I was very aware of the strengths that were in me that just came up and let me settle into the experience. This is what's happening. And just be there and have that experience. And not be worried, not be concerned. The practice was just there. The memories of Thich Nhat Hanh and the teachings were just there. We just have to get out of our own way and let the strength that we possess personally and the strength that flows from those people that live within us to manifest. So, in commemoration of Thich Nhat Hanh, I will give you some more Thich Nhat Hanh stories. Everybody keeps asking me now, of course, for Thich Nhat Hanh stories. You didn't ask. Well, I've been asked before, but you didn't ask this time. But I'll give you some examples of strength. The strength of forgiveness. The strength of forgiveness. Thich Nhat Hanh not only shared these amazing teachings with all of us in the West after we had turned his country into rubble, but he actually ran retreats for Vietnam veterans, people who had actually been in Vietnam, helping to create that rubble and chaos and death. That is the strength of forgiveness, the strength of acceptance. He was a consummate communicator, and like Zen teachers, he taught a lot by what he did. I gave you an example before, not just by what he said. So he continues to communicate post-grave through people like me that he has ordained as Dharma teachers, through others who have studied his teaching, through his books, through his poems, through his recordings. You know, the power of communication is such that it frightens authoritarian regimes. He was banished by the Diem regime from Vietnam because he wouldn't take sides. That banishment was continued by the communists when they took over because he wouldn't take sides and because authoritarian governments do not like other sources of strength or power within the country. And being a very prominent Buddhist in a Buddhist country is a very strong, is a big strength. I can give you an example of both his courage, because courage is a kind of strength, and his communication. He was finally allowed to go back to Vietnam, and I was on the first delegation that went back with him. And after a few days, we were standing in the courtyard of a temple, and I noticed that there were some monks talking animatedly and several other monks listening very carefully. And I realized that the two that were speaking Thai had had a meeting with the Vietnamese Politburo that day. We were in, and so I idled over to hear what was being talked about. But I got there too late, so I had to ask the monks who had been spoken to what had been said. Apparently, in the meeting with the Politburo, one of the people on the Politburo were lecturing him at great length about the virtues of communism. And Thich Nhat Hanh is a human, after all. And I've seen this happen on a couple of occasions. So I just had a picture of what was happening, that he finally got fed up. I've seen it happen in question and answer where people won't listen to the answer, but yeah, but. So he listened and he listened and he listened. And when this guy finally ran down, he said, "I'm very glad to hear that you are such fervent believers in communism. And if you would like to further and deepen your studies, I invite you to join the monastic community. We are fully communistic. No monastic owns anything. They don't own a house on the beach. They don't own a car. They don't own a cell phone." Knowing, of course, that some of those people were corrupt and had houses in the mountains and houses on the beach and, you know, big fancy Western cars and all those kind of things. He said, "You know, we own everything in common. We don't even own the clothes we're wearing. So I'm really glad to hear that you are all so deeply committed to communism, and I ask you to continue to deepen your practice of communism by joining us in the monastery." Now, you talk about prophecy and speaking truth to power. If they had taken it wrong, this is a communist country, they could have taken him out and had him shot. They could have thrown him in jail and never let him out, thrown all the rest of us out of the country, or thrown all the rest of us in jail that were there with him. But he's such a good communicator. They knew exactly what he was saying. But he was such a good communicator, and he managed to say it so skillfully that none of us got thrown in jail, none of us got shot, and they didn't withdraw permission for the tour. They let delegations of lay people continue to join every 3 weeks because they'd only let so many lay people in the country at once. So those of us who accompanied him on the first things, after 3 weeks, we had to leave, and then they brought in another, I think it was either 60 or 80 people, I can't remember how many. So it's that the strength that the prophets have, that speak truth to power when that truth needs to be heard. Strength as a communicator, he could convey more with a glance than most people could with a poem or a book chapter. One day at Plum Village, I was sitting toward the back of the meditation hall, and Sister Chong Hong, who's his number one disciple, sort of the second most famous person in our order, with a lot of authority, and who can be a little assertive, shall we say, came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, Rowen, I need to talk to you, Rowen. So she walked out the back right where he was going to come in to do the Dharma talk. So I'm standing there talking to her, going back and forth from foot to foot, like a little kid that needs to go to the toilet. And sure enough, as I expected, here he comes. Da-doom, dee-doom, da-doom, dee-doom, dee-doom, dee-doom. Now, Richard Baker Roshi, my first Zen teacher, described Thich Nhat Hanh as some mixture of cloud, snail, and heavy equipment. So here he comes, the snail, walking with his total mindfulness. As he goes past us, he gives me this look, and there's this kind look saying, I know whose fault this is, don't worry. And then he glanced at Chong Kong, and it was a, you know better. I mean, and it was just like he had pronounced those words. You knew exactly what he was communicating. It was just, he's so good. And he managed to really confront the Politburo about their self-centered version of communism without getting shot, jailed, or any of us thrown out of the country. So there's tremendous strength in communication. And the other thing is to remember, you're always communicating. We can't be together and not be communicating. I think I said here before that they study Zoom fatigue, and that one of the big contributions to Zoom fatigue is that you only get 60-some% of the information on Zoom that you get in person. So the communication environment is less rich, which means you have to work a lot harder to get the same amount out of it. Sorry, Zoom friends. Remind me, Linda, what time do I need to wind down? 5? Okay. The other strength that he has is absolute trust in spiritual practice and in us as practitioners. I've said here before that my summary of a talk that he gave on Sangha or congregation or community, I said that Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, that is teacher, teaching, community, is a history lesson, not a practice hierarchy. And he really believes that the Sangha jewel, that the community or the congregation is the true jewel, is the crown jewel. They're all true, but is a crown jewel. So people keep asking me who understand the way Buddhist lineages work, they say, well, who's his successor? He says, the Buddha didn't pick a successor, why should I? And then if you press him, he says, the Sangha is my successor. That is, he is a great believer in the strength of community. I'm sorry, Linda, but I'm about to quote the Bible. Where two or more are gathered together in my name, there shall I be also. Because when we come together, we multiply that strength of whatever it is, whatever you call it, whatever you label it. We multiply that strength. And he's a great believer in the power of the community. He believes that the community, the congregation, is the most important thing among important things. How many of you, when you come on Sunday morning, come as much to see the people as to hear the message? Don't put your hands up. I know it's all of you. How many of you who zoom in to hear the speaker as opposed to hopefully to get a view somewhere of your community? In Christianity, we have the Ten Commandments. In Zen and Buddhism, we have various lengths of precepts, but there are 5 precepts that all people, when you make a commitment to a lineage, that you take the 5 precepts, some version of those, but they're all the same thing. So they asked Suzuki Roshi one time, who was a Baker Roshi's teacher, my first Zen teacher, and he loved Suzuki Roshi. Like all of us love Tai, he loved Suzuki Roshi. They asked him one time, I wasn't there, this was reported to me. They said, do you watch your students to see if they're following the precepts? Like the Ten Commandments. He said, no. I just watch how they are with each other. How are we embodying the teachings? One of the Christian theologians said, the test of the spiritual is in the interpersonal. So it's not just a Zen thing or a Buddhist thing, it's also in Christianity. The most important thing is how we are with each other. The strength of communication, the strength of relationship. Now, in closing, let's pray together our prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.